Hi, and welcome to How Do I BI, a many-part screencast series on using SQL Server Analysis Services 2008, built around my book, Smart Business Intelligence Solutions with Microsoft SQL Server 2008. I'm Lynn Langett, Developer Evangelist with Microsoft in Southern California. And in this edition, I'm going to talk about the processes involved for processing SSAS objects, OLAP cubes, and dimensions. Before I go to the screencast, I'll cover the FAQs and gotchas. Around FAQs, when you're processing OLAP cubes and dimensions from bids, the process is manual. In other words, you have to click on some wizards in order to accomplish the process. And this is adequate for processing during development. However, just to make you aware, when you move to production, there are other ways to process that are more commonly used because they're automated or script-based. And these include execution of XMLA scripts, using SSMS to create jobs, or SSIS tasks. And I'll be having a future screencast on SSAS integration with SSIS where I'll be covering that. Another consideration is to process as granularly as is practical. Although you can process with one click all objects in an entire SSAS database, as I'll show you in the screencast, you usually don't want to do that because of the overhead and the time involved, even in a development environment. You'd prefer to process individual dimensions or individual cubes. The gotchas around this topic are that you should select an appropriate process type. Oftentimes during development, you'll just process everything full over and over and over to regenerate when you make structural changes. That is not something that you will normally do in production, and as you get more and more data in your OLAP structures, that's going to take a longer and longer time. You are required to fix any errors before executing a successful process, and these will be shown with red squiggly lines in the design interface. They'll also be described in the errors window in bids. And I'll remind you that objects may become unavailable for end users if you had any end users connected to the objects you are working on, depending on the process type. Process full, for example, will recreate both the structure of the object and repopulate it with data, and that would make the object unavailable during that processing type. If you're having excessive processing times, then you're actually encountering a bigger problem than something not working correctly in bids. What it usually is a poorly designed set of objects, and that's not a problem that can be easily remedied through clicking anywhere in bids. So I'll just caution you that if you're coming with excessive processing times, I have written about this in my book, some strategies that you can take. However, there is no substitute for implementing correctly designed objects, and that's why I spend so much time covering design practices in my book. And also I have a subsequent screencast in this series on the newly added AMO design warnings around OLAP cubes and dimensions, and you'll want to take a look at that as well. So let's go ahead and go to the screencast. Screencast, I'll be demonstrating using the sample in bids of OLAP cubes and dimensions how processing of SSAS objects is accomplished using bids. I won't be covering data mining structure processing in this screencast. I've created a separate one for that. So to get started, I've opened up the sample AdventureWorks inside of bids, and the simplest way to process all objects contained in an SSAS project is to right-click and then on the context-sensitive menu click on the process button, which will open the Process Database dialog box. You can see by default the object is AdventureWorks DW. It's set to the entire database, which would be all OLAP cubes, all dimensions, and all mining structures, all objects. And the default method is process full, which is recreate everything structurally and from a data standpoint. We have three options here: process default, process full, and unprocess. We have some default batch summary settings which are related to the processing order, whether it's parallel, the transaction mode, dimension errors, so on and so forth. In order to better understand these, I'm going to click on the Change Settings button, which will open a child dialog box called Change Settings that has two tabs inside of it. One is Processing Options and the other is Dimension Key Errors. And you can see by default that the processing order is set to parallel, and the server will decide the degree of parallelism. If you wish to control this more granularly, click on the drop down and then you can set from 1 to 128 parallel tasks during process. For transaction processing by default, the process is set to a single transaction. Again, if you wish to change that, you click on the sequential button, then the drop down, and then select separate transactions. If you're using a write-back table, the default option is to use existing. The other options that are available are create or create always. Affected objects will not be processed by default unless you turn on the optional checkbox. Moving to the dimension key errors section of the change settings dialog box, you can see that we have the default error configuration. This isn't documented in this dialog box, so if you wanted to drill in, you'd have to look at books online, or I've documented this in my book. If you wanted to make changes to the default error configuration, you click on the Use Custom Error Configuration, and then you'd be able to configure properties such as the key error action, which is set by default to convert to unknown. You have the option to discard that, and to set the number of errors and other types of values around dimension key errors. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here, and I'm going to close out of here because we don't want to implement a process that processes all objects. Rather, we want to follow the best practice of processing more granularly. Now, if I open data sources, you'll see we have some data sources, and if I right-click, there is no process associated with this, and that's because the data sources and the data source views will be processed on the first time when you process the entire database, which has been done here because we are now actually working in a connected mode. So any changes that we make are being made live. I'll remind you that there's two ways to work in BIDS. One is connected, which is best suited for single developer environments, and the other is disconnected, where you make your changes and then you would deploy them during the process. Because we are connected, we do not have any build and deploy steps available on our context-sensitive menus. If we look now at cubes, we'll see that we have two cubes, and we right-click on AdventureWorks to open the process dialog box for our cube, and then we'll be able to take a look at the processing options that are available for cubes. Now, I'm not going to take the time in the screencast to explain all these options. I'll just show you where they are available. Again, this is detailed in books online or in my book. So if you look in the Process Cube dialog box under Process Options, the default is Process Full, and we have other processing options which are more granular, such as Process Structure or Process Index. I'm going to close out of here, and now I'm going to go to the Dimensions container, and I'm going to select the reseller dimension and right-click on it, and then I'm going to click on Process. And that will open the familiar now Process dialog box, and then I will tell you what processing options are available for dimensions. For dimensions, by default, they're set to process update, which is simply to process any of the changes that are available. And I'm going to go ahead and allow that process to run so that you can take a look at the information that's generated when a process is executed in BIDS. So I'm going to click on the Run button, and that's going to open up the Process Progress dialog box, which will show us a line-by-line status of the processing of the particular object that's been selected. So you can see that we've got a processing dimension reseller executing, and as the process is occurring, we'll see live what commands are being executed. Now, this is a pretty quick process because we haven't made any changes to the dimension itself. It's basically just taking a look and then re-executing on any of the structure that has been changed. So if I drill in, well, first we can see that the process has succeeded, and if I drill in, I can see that there are a couple of steps. All the steps have associated times, and this is so that you can help to diagnose and fix any slow processing problems. And in this case, we have a measure group that was processed, and if we drill in, it's going to show us the associated time for reseller orders, reseller sales, and then we're going to drill in to the dimension processing, and we're going to see quite a bit of detail here. So you can see the start time, the stop time, and we can drill down to the attribute level. So starting with the all attribute, we can see how long it took to process individual attributes and how many rows were affected. So for example, in the address attribute, 688 rows have been read, and I can drill down to the level of the source SQL query. I can click on it, and if it won't fit on the screen, I can click on View Details and see the actual query. Now, for the purposes of developing, this information is great because it can help you to locate bottlenecks. When you move to production, of course, you're going to automate these processes, and you'll capture this information if it's relevant out to a log rather than displaying it in a live window. And as I mentioned in the introduction, it's common to execute these object process methods via XMLA script, SSMS, or SSIS, and in a subsequent screencast I'll show you the integration between SSAS and SSIS, including object processing. Thank you.